Good afternoon. Welcome to week 10 of the fall 2016 Sunoikisis Digital Classics module. This is the Digital Archaeology and Ancient History stream of the Sunoikisis program, and we're joined this week by Silke Vanbeselaere from the University of Leuven and Greg Woolf from the Institute of Classical Studies, who are going to talk to us about network analysis and various topics around that. And I believe Greg is going to start us off with a general introduction to networking, and we have space for questions at the end. I should maybe note that we normally have a section at the end, 15 minutes spare at the end, where we can have discussion and so forth. But because Greg is going to have to leave a little bit early, he'll miss that final session. So if you have any questions for him, do feel free to ask them earlier in the session, so after the first 15 minutes or after his second presentation a bit later. Okay, I'll pass over to Greg. You'll need to unmute yourself, Greg. You're still muted. There you go.
Okay, right. Can people hear me now?
Yes.
Wave? Yes, good, excellent. Okay, welcome everyone. Yes, what I'm going to do is to just try and introduce some of the very basics of network theory, which is almost as far as I've got. You know, I hope we can talk about other things later. I'm going to go to a PowerPoint now. Can people see the PowerPoint?
Not yet.
Any luck yet?
No, we're still seeing you. You need to share your screen, I think.
Right, okay, hang on. Remind me how I do that.
Little red square on the green square on the top left corner of the Google Hangout window.
Okay. How's that now? Any better?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, so these are the basics then. There's lots of different kinds of network theories, and almost the first thing anyone who does it tells you when you talk to them is that you need to pick them quite carefully for the particular project that you're doing. But a general explanation is really what I put up there, that using networks, it's a way of abstracting a very simple version of reality in a way that you can visualize it and manipulate it and try and understand how it works. And the key is it represents what the relationships are between individual data, and I'll explain what that means a bit later. Of the things you can do with it, you can make pictures that help you understand better. You can also do more sophisticated analysis, and near the end I'll come on to Carl Nappett's idea that even if you can't do that because your data is too crummy, there might still be some advantage in what he calls network thinking. So first of all, what's the network got in?
Sure. Sorry, Greg, I'm not sure we're seeing your slides themselves. We're just seeing your PowerPoint window.
Ah, okay.
It's still on the first slide, and we can see the slide viewer on the left, as it were.
Okay, right. So it should. So at the moment I'm running the slideshow.
Okay, if you click on the screen share button again, and when you screen share, if you select the whole screen or the whole desktop, then we'll be able to see whatever you can see, and there won't be any confusion.
Okay. So is that working a bit better?
So yes, that looks like it. Yeah, yeah. So now when you press present, we should be able to see the same thing exactly.
Yeah, and now second slide.
Yeah.
Okay, right. So that's what I just said then in words. A network consists of dots joined by lines. The dots are called nodes, or sometimes vertices, and the lines are called ties, or sometimes lines and links. And each node stands for an individual bit of data, an individual thing. And each tie for a relationship between it. So what you're doing with network theory is you're drawing a map of the relationships between individual things, and almost anything can be a datum, so long as it's discrete. There's just one of it. It's very definite what it is, and it's unambiguous. And you'll see what I mean, I hope, as we go along. Every network diagram is a simplification of reality, and that's true of any theory, really. And what's important is to make sure you're simplifying it in the right way, so that the variables that matter are kept, and the ones that you lose when you make it simple are ones you don't need to worry about. So, for example, if each of your data are human beings, individuals, there might be purposes for which you'd be interested in differentiating by gender, but not by their hair colour. And so from that point of view, you'd want to set up your parameters accordingly. Here's a network diagram, and this is, for some of us, a very familiar one. This is a map of the London Metro, the London Underground. And in this case, the vertices are railway stations, or underground railway stations, and the ties are stretches of line that go between any two railway stations. Now, what's lost in this? The one thing that's lost is depth. These lines are not all at the same level. Some are a lot deeper than others. And another thing that's lost is speeds. You might think that the distance between any two nodes ought to be the same, but some of these lines are a great deal faster than some of the other ones. And so a network, that's what I mean by it being a simplification of reality. In this case, it's a very simple thing. It simply tells you how you get from one node to another. And there's even satirical games on the radio about how to do this. If you wanted, on the other hand, to do more complicated things, like to work out where you could dig a new tube, you'd need to learn a lot more about the network than this. And of course, its relationship to above ground is quite schematic, as you can see from the River Thames, which doesn't actually have these rather alarming corners in it. So this is a schematic model. Now, if we're thinking about classical studies, ancient classics in general, you can choose almost anything to be your node. They could be individuals, named people, Cicero and his friends, correspondents to the Apostle Paul. They could be cities, or other kinds of settlement, or villas, or sanctuaries. They can be objects, inscriptions, for example, painted pottery. And they can even be a different kind of object, the physical manuscript on which a text is written. And I've chosen those items as examples because they're all the kind of things where we are quite often interested in them, not just for themselves, but for their relationships. How is the city related to the other cities in the area? What about these individuals? Who does Cicero know? Who does he know well? Who does he know not so well? Are the people that he needs to go through somebody else to get to? And you'll see some examples of this in a moment. I put at the bottom things that nodes can't represent. They can't represent big categories of stuff like amphorae or the citizen body. And they can't represent things that aren't discrete, old, large, red. They're ambiguous and so. In other words, network theory can do certain things quite well, but it's not going to work with other kinds of questions. And even when you see, for example, a diagram of different amphorae forms related with lines, this isn't really a network theory in a very precise or helpful sense. It's just a diagrammatic representation. Now, those are the nodes. What kind of relationships can we think about? Well, if we think about people, you could think about relationships of kinship. Is the father of, is the patron of, or for towns, is connected by road to, or simply knows A knows B, B knows A. Now, I put down the bottom that almost immediately there's some complexities that some of our ties, some of our links, you can go down them either way, just like you can go either way on a tube line from one station to another. And so if the town of Sparta is connected to Messene by a road, Messene is connected to Sparta by a road. On the other hand, if Agamemnon's the father of Orestes, Orestes isn't the father of Agamemnon. So already you begin to see there are certain kind of uses where you might want to put an arrow on your tie, and others where you're quite happy to just have them expressing a general connection. Now, we already use networks in a sort of informal way in all sorts of ways. 3 examples: family trees, stemmata used in textual criticism, and road maps. So here's a family tree, and you can see here the nodes are Julio Claudians, and we have 2 kinds of ties here. The equals is a tie of marriage, and the other tie is a tie of filiation. Augustus is the son of Octavius, he marries Scribonia, he marries Tiberius, and so on. Mark Antony's daughter is Antonia. And so these are, of course, all directional ties. This is perhaps less familiar to some, but it's very familiar to people who've worked on Latin texts. Most of the texts most Latin texts that we use, we don't have any copies of them written before the Middle Ages. And some of them, we don't have any copies written before the early modern period. And so when people set out to work out what the original version of, say, Asconius was, then they start from a whole range of manuscripts. And these manuscripts, they need to work out how they descend from each other. Now, one traditional way is to look at errors they share. So you could say if G and S have a particular mistake in them, which none of these others do, then they probably go back to an imaginary manuscript, that's the one we're imagining, in which that mistake was made. And it's through methods like that people trace organized families of manuscripts. And this matters quite a lot, particularly if you then end up with a judgment that say this one is a rather careless copy of that, and that's a better copy of that, which means you might want to prefer, when there's a dispute, a reading in this to a reading in either G or S. These ones at the bottom are the ones we've really got. The rest of them are just inferred ancestors. And then, of course, there's the traditional roadmap version of a network, and this is a Roman network map. That the map of the Roman Empire, called the Peutinger Table. This preserves connections, so topologically it's okay. Any town that has a road to another town really did in antiquity. But that's the Mediterranean Sea you're seeing there. It's been squidged enormously. And the whole Roman Empire is a scroll that's several meters long that you roll out. And so the empire's been squidged and flattened. And this is effectively just the same as the tube mapper. So long as you don't try and use it to calculate area or to cut across from one road to another, so long as all you're doing is going backwards and forwards on this, it's perfectly efficient, just like the tube map is perfectly efficient, even though some of your tunnels are 10, 30 meters below other ones. There's varieties of kinds of network analysis that are in common use. One of the commonest is the social network analysis, and this is really 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon in a slightly more rigorous form. So what you can do with it, and you can develop it in different levels of rigor. A simple version would take all of Cicero's letters, written in a pretty narrow period, about a decade, and you would connect Cicero to anybody he wrote to, and then you would then connect the people who he wrote to other people mentioned in that letter. And what you would then get, and I haven't done it, I've seen someone else do it, but couldn't find a copy of her slide, I'm afraid. But what you get is you get clusters of people who know each other quite well and are always talking about each other and mentioning each other and referring to visits, and other clusters as well who don't connect with those except through Cicero. And you begin to see how Cicero has put himself in the center of a whole set of little networks, mostly of aristocrats, mostly of Romans, and acts as a kind of broker between them. Now, knowing somebody is a very vague relationship. That idea that you can connect anyone on the planet to anyone else in 6 steps only works if know can mean met at a party, is a relative of, and all the rest of it. So for our purposes, for analytical purposes, we generally want to be more precise. Now, a very simple way of doing this is to link 2 names if they appear in the same inscription. Now, what this will do is it will create lots and lots of tiny pairs, people commemorating their father or brother or whatever, but you will also begin to get some individuals who appear on many more. And of course, an obvious example would be the emperors, whose names appear on very many of them. We could also have directional links. Someone is married to, someone is the child of, or the parent of, or you could even say, if you've got any one of those relationships, you have a link. And then you'll see what we're beginning to do is we're beginning to animate prosopographic data. So instead of having tables and tables of members of the Roman aristocracy with notes saying this person is the relative of that, we begin to see a map. Now, there's a health warning here. You can make it more and more complicated. I've suggested ways to make it complicated here and differentiating, but the more complex you make it, the more different kinds of symbols, the more it matters if you've got gaps in your data. And so if you're making a map of the Roman aristocracy, and some of the people are missing, suppose you know the names of 4 of the sons of someone who has 6 sons, or if you know that, or if you're not quite sure whether an individual is one person or 2 and they've got the same name, as often happens. Network theory is very poor at showing areas of ambiguity and vagueness. So what SNA, what social network analysis works best with is big data sets, and ideally you want sets where if 2 or 3 of the nodes are wrong, it doesn't really scramble the pattern. There is an alternative which you can use, which is called attribute analysis, which is where instead of trying to connect people with lines, you simply classify them with properties that refer to them. And in that case, you're really not doing a network at all. You're not looking at relationships, but you are looking at correlations. So a simple attribute analysis like this would tell you the unsurprising fact about antiquity that no Roman senators were female. I'm not sure that's a particularly good use of the technology, but it can be used. Now, there's also other kinds of network analysis, and one that appeals to those who are more archaeologically inclined are the variety of spatial ones. So this would be networks of cities or sites or communities. In this case, you start not from a sort of a blank slate and start doing dots on it, but you start from a real map. And what you do is you begin to draw lines between real points on that map. And one example of this is what's called proximal point analysis, sometimes nearest neighbor analysis. And what this does is it connects up each settlement to usually to its 3 or 4 nearest neighbors. And what this should show is how far settlements in an area are clustered and how far they're part of a loosely spread framework. So you can imagine if you had a plain on which farms were scattered at almost identical intervals, then the network you got would be a very loose frame, sort of stretching out across the plain in all directions. But in reality, of course, things are much more concentrated than that. One rather nice application to this was made by Cyprian Broodbank when he was looking at communications across the Aegean Sea, and how you would which settlements could be connected to others if you have very slow means of communication. And in the Neolithic, when there are no sailing vessels around, where people are actually paddling large canoes backwards and forwards, distances expand enormously in terms of journey time. So doing something like this enables you to see which islands do seem to cluster and which do not. Now, what Broodbank did was he did a version of proximal point analysis and connected each settlement as far as he could work out where it was, and he did have a not complete record, to the 3 nearest. And this is what you get. You get maps of the Cyclades, which in different periods or different versions show you that certain islands, Naxos here, are almost always likely to be hubs, and you can change the parameters of how you connect it in other ways. And you see that this cluster, Naxos and the islands that connect to it, Santorini down here, are almost always connected to each other, but these more northern distant groups of islands are not always very close or very accessible. Now, this is actually quite important because you then match this set of theoretical predictions to what we can actually see. And if people are moving to an island that's very difficult to get to, then that invites us to think, why is this happening? So, for example, in the Western Med, this is the Eastern Med, the Western Med, people apparently occasionally paddle for a couple of days in the open sea in order to get to the Lipari Islands off Sicily, where they're able to get obsidian, a very rare, very hard volcanic glass you can use for tools, a bit like flint. It also enables you also to see how distributions of objects like Cycladic idols and so on are distributed, and whether they reflect communities that are formed by being in touch with each other or not. And one could imagine going on and doing other kind of network analyses, connecting up, for example, particular Cycladic idols or things like that, and then comparing it to the transit ones and getting some sense of how far communications is the key thing shaping human interaction in this period. A lot of network analysis, a lot of successful stuff has been about movement across a network. Now that movement can be different things. It can be movement of people, like in the last example of Neolithic people paddling around the Cyclades. It can move to goods, trade objects, and of course this is particularly useful for those kind of objects where we have some idea about where they come from and some idea of where they end up archaeologically, where you've got good context and rare materials, rare marbles and things like that. But particularly information, and the movement of information across a network is something to be studied a lot by social scientists. One thing they're quite interested in is how innovations move. How, for example, do news about new agricultural practices or what makes people take up a new product. Often they say they hear it from word of mouth, but in that case it matters a lot how word of mouth gets moved about. And so mapping connections should tell us some of the potentials of a given network of people. Now, these are only potentials, not all potentials are realized, and so we sometimes want to ask why a potential fails to be realized. And there's two sets of variations in network to think about. One is the density of connections, and the other is how it's structured. So the last few slides, I want to just look at those things. How dense is a network? In this case, you've got a picture in the middle. This comes from Anna Collar's work, the small world model, where you don't know everybody else in the network, but you more or less know you're 2 or 3 jumps ahead of everybody, connected to everybody else. So information here circles relatively quickly. This is a gossip world, in other words, a world in which one bit of information about Brad and Angelina is almost immediately spreads through to everybody. So it's a world in which people have more or less the same information resources, and new bits of information when they get into this world spread very quickly. It's also a world in which exchange of information binds it closer together. Now, other worlds, you can see it's a bit more hazardous. This person here might wait quite a long time before hearing a bit of information that came in here. But it could get there quite rapidly, but might take quite a lot of moves. One of the most sort of quoted articles on network theory is by a man named Granovetter, and what he argued is that quite often when we're looking at communications, it's actually the weaker links that are the most important. But now a wiki means imagine this is a community of people who all know each other, this alike. Something they know here might circulate for a long time before it gets to here. But if one member of this community knows one member of that community, even only occasionally, meets them once a month, once a year, these weak links are actually crucial in getting information or goods from one bounded group to another. And this has been applied by Anna Collar as an attempt to understand religious change in the Roman Empire, and that's in a book I'll show you a shot of in a minute, where what she's attempted to do is to try to show the particular pre-existing social groups who you can map out in terms of social networks. Once an idea gets to them, there's a high degree of pickup. Now, there are questions about how far you can push that. Simply because somebody tells me something, I won't necessarily pass it on. Simply because someone introducing me to a new fizzy drink, I might not recommend it to other people. So there's many other factors about why information moves apart from simply who's connected to who. But who's connected to who is the basic bottom line. If someone's peripheral to all these networks, they're going to get news later or not at all. The final suggestion that I wanted to bring up to you was that from Carl Nappert's writing. Carl Nappert's one of the more thoughtful people writing about network theory at the moment, and he suggests that even when we can't actually quantify, sometimes just thinking about things as networks helps. And the best example I found from that for the classical world is this book by Radi Malkin, a small Greek world. And one of the things that Malkin starts by doing says, I thought it was odd that people become more intensely aware of how Greek they are at more or less the same moment where the Greeks end up dispersed over a much bigger area than ever before. So 8th century, when you begin to get Greek cities in Africa and southern Italy and Sicily and even southern France and around the Black Sea. And his argument was that once Greeks spread out from their Aegean point of origin, they end up being connected to each other by multiple ties that in many ways creating something like a small world, even if it's actually geographically quite a large one. And that one of the bits of information that goes round as that network operates is a sense of who's in the network, who's not. And that's why becoming, as you do scatter people out further and further, maybe you care less whether you're from Miletus or from Smyrna and care more about whether you're a Greek or a Carian or a Greek or a Libyan. Now, this isn't something you can actually quantify. The data's not there anymore. Even if you could get a set of Greek cities, we can't demonstrate exactly which ones are connected to which others. But Malkin's argument is that thinking about Greek society as not as a bounded, localized, concentrated society, but as a network of relationships, is itself quite a useful metaphor that helps us understand how things work. So those are the main points I wanted to suggest. The Anna Collar book that can I do this? If I now just go back to this is the book by Anna Collar I mentioned, and this is probably the only fully fledged ancient history book that, apart perhaps from Malcolm's, but this is more quantified, that actually uses network theory. So if you're interested in having a look at this wouldn't be a bad place to start, particularly the first chapter, which explains some of her positions. One can make criticisms, but it's quite an interesting experiment, I think. So that's my actually more than 50-minute introduction.
Thanks, Greg. I'll hand over to Silke. You'll need to unmute yourself, Silke.
Yes, hello. I will first be talking about a case study, my own research that I'm doing, and I'm using network theory and network analysis to study this, but I'll show that to you now. Right. Okay. So my research is all about, it's part of the Ptolemaic Empire. It's all about Egypt, but specifically all about the ancient capital city of Upper Egypt, Thebes. Now in Thebes, it was always a very important and quite a large city that is spread out on both sides of the Nile. So you've got the east side, which is by that point called Diospolis Magna, which refers back actually to Thebes being the city of Ammon, as Diospolis Magna refers to the great city of Zeus, and Zeus was often the same as Ammon at that point. Yes, and on the east side, so in Diospolis Magna, most of the people lived around there, as it's still the case, actually, as you can see here on this quite modern map of Thebes. Then on the western bank, we have Memnonaea, and we have a couple of other villages that I don't include, workmen's villages, and Medinet Habu, but I'm focused on Memnonaea, which is where quite a lot of the tombs of the funerary priests were, and I don't mean just tombs of funerary priests, but tombs that funerary priests looked after. And often in those tombs, archives of those funerary priests are found, as they seem to have kept quite a lot of their valuables in there. So those are the two sides of Thebes and I both look at those. I think the only other thing that's probably interesting is that the population at this point, so of Ptolemaic Thebes, which is about the 3rd century BC, was probably about 50,000 people, with only a few thousand Greeks later on in the Ptolemaic era. But I'm just looking at the very start of the Ptolemaic reign, which is around 330 BC until the end of the 3rd century. So that is what I look at. I was talking before a bit about the funerary priests. So Thebes, there was a huge religious community there, because you have the Valley of the Kings and the Queens around there. And these priests were quite powerful before the Ptolemaic era. So, for example, this picture is a mummy wrap of a son of somebody I will talk about a bit later. So on the left-hand side, you can see that son of that person all wrapped up. And on the right-hand side, you can see two figures who are funerary priests, doing all the things that they were supposed to do. So we have a very big collection of sources that is all to do with these funerary priests, high priests of Ammon, which are really powerful people, and funerary priests, all sorts, water pourers, koachites they're called. So with this, we've got quite a lot of contracts, letters, all kinds of things about them. So it's an interesting place to look at if you want to know anything about that religious community at this point. I restrict myself to just the property contracts from so the 3rd century BC mainly. They're written in Demotic, the Egyptian language that was used at that point, or script that was used at that point. You have a picture there of what they look like, or at least what the back of them looks like. These property contracts, they had 3 main actors. There was a scribe, obviously, drawing up the documents. Then there were usually 2 contractual parties, although sometimes we hear about people as interested parties that are also written about in the contract. And then you've got at the back of the contract a list of usually 16 witnesses. It's not always 16 witnesses, but it's that's sort of the general rule, that there were 16. Now, quite a lot of research has been done on the scribes and on contractual parties, as you can follow them through these archives of families, of scribes, or of these big contractual parties. But not a lot has been done on the witnesses, for obvious reasons, because all we know is what comes at the back of these contracts. You just have a name and a father's name usually, and very rarely you get something like and their career, just their job basically, for example, funerary priest or some kind of title. So I think that's why most people haven't tried to figure out who these witnesses precisely were. And my main question is, what part of the community were they at Thebes? How were they chosen? Was it the scribe that chose these people to come to the notary and put their names on the back of these contracts? Or was it people that the contractual parties knew? Was it just people somehow involved in the larger family of the contractual parties, as can be seen sometimes in the Near East? That happened there. But so nobody's really entirely sure, and I'm using network analysis now to try and figure out at least the direction that we could be thinking in about them. Right. Right. The person that we're going to be focusing on, or that I'm going to talk to you about, is that father of the guy wrapped as a mummy that you saw before. This Esminis, son of Thebes, was a scribe, but also a high priest of Ammon. And because his son was, the mummy wrappings of his son were found in a tomb, and the cover of his coffin of that son was found as well. So that was quite, it's quite good that to try and draw up a family tree. So people long before me have done that. And there were other people buried in the same complex that were all part of this family. So you could from that draw up a sort of family tree, but mainly based on the women, because once people were put in these tombs, they were identified not any longer with their father's name, but with their mother's name. So then suddenly you get quite a difficult moment in how to identify sometimes if you only know Esmenes as son of Thebes, but then suddenly you find a tomb saying Esmenes, son of his mother, then sometimes you might get quite confused. Anyway, so that's one part of the information that I have about these people. I don't have this kind of information about all of those actors involved in the property contracts, but this is a good example. Right, the next slides will be more networky. So one of the first things that I did, as seen as Esmenes is a scribe, was I wanted to look at the relations between all these scribes attested. The network that you can see is a network based on, so all the nodes in the network are scribes. They're all attested as scribes. They are linked together if they have ever written or drawn up a contract for the same contractual party, not for the same family, but for the exact same contractual party, or one of them at least. I did that because I thought, well, if a contractual party chooses a scribe, but then for his next contract chooses a different one, that's quite annoying if those are different notaries to go to, and well, you know those people, it doesn't really seem logical. So I just assumed maybe that it would show me something about people working together in the same notary. So this is the result of that. That's the network. When you look around Esmenes, he's one of the bigger blue nodes. You have slightly below him on the left side, you've got another scribe called Pinheris. And then above Esmenes on the right-hand side, you've got Harmais. Both these scribes are attested to have had a father called Esmenes. So I looked more into that, and it seems very likely that these are sons of our Esmenes, of that scribe. So this network may be quite good at representing scribes working together in the same notary. There's obviously some dates things as well that you need to keep in mind, but this visualization of the network can help us with trying to figure out what that scribe Messerituiev was doing in that one contract, why he is only attested once. Okay, it may have something to do with our data, but we have quite a lot of all these other people that he's connected with. So he might have just been standing in as an agent to Esmenes or Pinheris. So I use the networks to think about those kind of things as well. Now, if we go on, you could say that this is the same network because it has all the same actors in it. So these are, again, all our same scribes, but this time they are only connected if they shared any witnesses. So if they drew up a contract and used at least one witness, well, if both of them at least used the same witness ones. Mostly the same people are still connected as in the previous network that you could see here, although some changes have definitely happened. So it's not as easy or as straightforward that we can just say, oh, well, if people work together probably as scribes in a notary, then they also chose the same witnesses. So witnesses are just connected in a way as professional people to a notary. It doesn't seem that straightforward. But on the other hand, there is definitely something there. And if you then go into the sources, even though we can't identify all these witnesses, sometimes there is a son of a scribe popping up as one of the 16 witnesses. That definitely does not mean that all those 16 witnesses are all somehow related or friends of the scribe or of the notary. But yes, so it does help us saying, well, it's not fully We can't say that the witnesses are fully connected as professional people to the notary, but there is definitely something there that we should look at. So then I go and look at each case individually. Now, I've been talking about the three main actors, as most people have done before me. But in these property contracts, when the scribe describes a property, he also always tells you who the neighbors are on the north, the south, the east, and west side. So you always have at least four neighbors mentioned there. Most people have left those out, except for researchers trying to make basically a geographical representation or topographical representation of Thebes and of certain neighborhoods. I include those neighbors now because I believe, and I think most people will agree, that it's not just a sign of a geographical space or entity, but also of a social community, because all these people knew each other. So, for example, if we look at this one, this is a bit more complicated. I do realize that that blue node in the center is Minis again. And all the orange nodes are neighbors. The yellow nodes are people who are attested as neighbors, but also as something else, sometimes as a first contractual party or as a witness. So when you add those, you suddenly get lots more connections between people that probably did know each other. Because if you look at that, if you just look at one property and you know, okay, these people were all neighbors at some point, and then this guy takes that property over, and then they were all neighbors. But if you actually map them all together, you don't just get that geographical space, but also people who actually knew each other probably and talked to each other, or at least, you know, were aware that the other one existed. So it's information that we can't just ignore to try and find out whether these witnesses were somehow connected to neighborhoods or to certain communities or groups of people. So now I'm also looking at titles, so whether some people were more connected to carpenters or to certain groups of the funerary priests, whether any of that is important when looking at the network. And I go through each of these individually, like I have done with Asconius today. I started out with him because he scored as one of the highest, well, he had one of the highest degrees and between centralities as a scribe. So that is how I start. I look at, why do these people score as highly as they do? Is it just because of the way our sources come in? Or is it date related, or does it actually tell us something else, that this guy was maybe the main scribe, and that is why he is connected to so many other people. Right, so that is the research I am doing at the moment, and I'll talk to you later to explain how to work with Gephi, I think. Okay.
Great, thanks. Back over to Greg for a second case study. You're still muted.
Hello. Yes. No, I actually, sorry, I put the Broodbank one into the first one because I thought that we would not have enough time. But so I need to go at about 4, I'm afraid, because I'm introduced to your seminar. But this might be a good time to have any questions that come out of my one, if that's okay.
All right, so you've already done the case study?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, then we're not behind schedule at all. So yes, if anyone has any comments they wanted to make before Greg disappears. If not, we'll go back to Silke for the software demo.
Any comments or questions, or everyone's dumbstruck?
They're a very shy bunch anyway. I'll let you know if there's any comments at the end anyway that would be useful to you.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, let's pass back to Silke then. If that's okay, Silke.
Right, yes, okay, I can do that, that's fine. I had a sip of water, so. So yes, I've just talked about, well, we've just seen the theoretical concepts behind network theory and network analysis. and we've presented you with 2 case studies. So now we'll want to think about the more practical side of this session on how to actually make your own networks, preferably with a free software tool that isn't too complicated. So I will introduce Gephi to you, which is free to download at the same, well, at the website called Gephi as well. Right, I prefer to use Gephi because it is free and because it's quite intuitive once you get to know how to import your data. And it also has many options to add functions and plugins, which are all free again. For example, a geo layout, so you can have, if you're working with data like Greg is, you can actually have it put on a map, on a Google map, basically. So you can look at that. And they have a new plugin, which is called the dynamic plugin, so that you can actually see change in your network over time, which is very useful as historians. That is exactly what we need, because now it's you either need to take little parts of your network or see it all together, but then warn people and warn yourself that this is not actually, well, it's never the reality, but yes, to look at it that way. So that is why I will be using Gephi. We will be working with sample data sets that you can find here. I hope you can see that. It's on the GitHub wiki of this week. I will be working with my own data just for now, because I know it the best and because it doesn't give me any problems or delays. One of those networks, if you're going to try them, the Comic and Hero network, is quite big, so you need to give your computer a lot of patience. And yes, yeah, it's quite big. It's an interesting one. It's not classical data or anything, but it's quite good. Okay. What else do I need to say before we do that? Oh, okay. So these sample data sets are all ready to just be imported into Gephi, which is usually not the case if you're going to do any research on this. You will have your own data, and you will have to try and make it so that Gephi accepts it, which is, I think, the most difficult part of using Gephi, actually. If you'd like to do that, you will need to have 2 Excel CSV files, and you will have to, one of these files will be all the information about your nodes, and the other one will be all about the ties or edges. And Gephi calls it edges and edge list. So you will need a node list and an edge list that you can both import into Gephi. If you need any help with that, I would recommend my very easy tutorial on here on the Historical Data Ninjas website. Never mind all the jokes in between. But this will tell you exactly how to make these that node list, and how to import it, and how to make an edge list. You can find other tutorials on there as well, but that is what you need at this point. Another thing that you might want to use if you're going to be using your own data, or actually want to do some network research, is a tool on this Media Lab Sciences website. It's called Table2Net. And what it does is, for example, with my data, my database gives me all the data in a way saying this person appears in that text, and then all the attributes. So I have people connected to texts, basically, but I'm not terribly interested in that. I am interested in people that appear in the same texts, or sometimes only witnesses to scribes or things like that. And this tool can actually help you transform your data set, if it's people to text or anything, to different entities that you actually want to just have one entity, depending on that second one. You can use this software, which is also freely available, to make your own Gephi file, and then it will immediately give you as an output a Gephi file, so you can just import it the way that we're now going to use the sample data sets as well. It's very useful because at least you don't have to use R or anything anymore the way that I have had to in the beginning. So this is a very, very good tool. Right. I think that was the introduction to that. Yes. Okay, then I think we can start with Gephi. I'll try to open it. Gephi can be a bit temperamental sometimes, but I think this newest version seems to be doing all right at the moment. I've had some problems with it in the beginning, but right, so this is what you will see once you open Gephi. You can just go to open graph file to then import the graph, well, the Gephi file that you have downloaded from the website. If you're going to be working with your own data, you will have to click on new project, but again, on the historical data Ninja's website, it's all explained, and then you can import your node list and your edge list. I will open my graph file, the one that I know best. Right. And then you will get this window telling you how many nodes there are, how many edges there are. So I've got about 30,000 edges between my nodes. It's not a dynamic graph at the moment. It doesn't have dynamic attributes, which means that my network doesn't change in time yet. The one that I've made, it should, but it doesn't do that. This version of it doesn't do that. Then you can also choose whether your edges are directed or not. Well, it's only giving me the option of undirected or mixed because it can tell that it's definitely not directed. And once that has been done, you can just click on OK. Now you will get this very random layout. If you want to see your data, we're now in the panel overview. You can go to data laboratory, where you will see your node list with all the little attributes that you've added, if you have added any, and your edge list here. You can see whether any of these edges have more weight than the other ones. So for example, if I've spoken more to a person, if I've spoken 3 times to a person, then the edge weight between me and that other person will be 3, for example. If I've only ever spoken once, then it will be 1. Let's go back to overview. To make this a bit more readable, because at the moment it's completely spatialized randomly and completely unreadable, obviously. So we can go to choose a layout. The one to usually start with is Vruchterman-Reingold, because it keeps it all together in a way, but already distinguishes between certain groups it can see. You can read a lot more about these layouts if you actually want to know how it works. It's quite slow, this one. I could speed it up by adding some speed there, but I'll be a bit patient. Okay, I'm not that patient. I'll just... My computer is quite strong, so I can do things like that. Your computer may not always be happy if you do things like that. So once you get this kind of layout, it's all over the place, you can't see everything anymore. You can click on this blue magnifying glass to center it again, which is very useful. Now, another layout that you can run, which is quite good for historical data, is Force Atlas 2, uncheck approximate repulsion, and prevent overlap. It is a good one to have so that nodes don't overlap each other, obviously. This has a sort of gravitational algorithm behind it. So nodes and groups of nodes that are closely connected will be pulled closer even, but those groups will be pushed away from all the other ones as well. So you can get a better view on all these different communities. Right, I'll stop that for now. It's a bit clearer, it's not great, but it's something we can work with. Another thing you can do is here in appearance, you go to ranking, well, size. This means size. I don't know what to call this, so it's very unclear. It has to do with size, how big your nodes are going to be. Ranking, and we can choose degree. So degree means how many connections a node has. So a node with a lot of connections will now, if I apply, become a lot bigger than the other ones. Right. This is the color that you can change of nodes. Well, you can change it of edges as well, the color, but we are in the node list now. Color. At the moment, we only have degree and occurrences count because I put that in there. And then partition, we will have all our attributes. So I could change the color depending on the gender or the name or the ethnic, if there's anything there, or the date, the act. I've got quite a lot of attributes that I work with. But you could also add some statistics to this. You could run the average weighted degree, so that it takes into account then that weighted degree that we looked at in the data laboratory. So do you remember when I said, so if I've spoken to somebody 3 times, then our edge, that tie between us, is stronger than if I've spoken to somebody only once. So you might be interested in that. So you can run that. You'll get a little report if you need that. And then you will see that here that has appeared, because now it has added all that data, all the weighted degree things to your data laboratory, and it has also made it available to you here. So you can choose the coloring here that you want to look at, for example, something like that. I inverted the color choice because it's always easy to find the biggest nodes anyway, so it's often better to have the darkest colors for the small nodes that are going to be smaller and less important, so you can still at least see them, because if that would have been white, you wouldn't have been able to see quite a few of these nodes. So prevent overlap was on. Since I did the layout, I changed the size of the nodes, and that's why they were overlapping again. But I changed that by running it again. Right, I'll tell you a couple of other things and then I'll stop. Another thing that can be interesting, the network diameter hides basically the metrics of betweenness centrality and closeness centrality and network diameter. Obviously, we're not going to run that now. This modularity will help you see different communities in your data. You can run that. You can change the resolution, as it says here. If you put it lower, you will get more communities. It changes the algorithm behind it, but we'll just keep it like that for now. That will run. It will tell you how many communities you have. Well, that has been able to detect, 45 in my case. And now that will have been added here as well. So you can now actually change those colors depending on that, which I will do. You can change the colors if you want to by clicking on them. So, and this is a different way of looking at them, because you might not immediately trust what the computer tells you as a community, but it is very interesting to look at your data and see why the computer has decided that this person and that person are both in that pink group, for example. Right, those are the main things for now. There are filters as well, which you should definitely look at. So you can hide certain groups if you only want to look at one group, or only look at nodes that have a higher degree than 5 or something like that, then this is the place to do that. Now, if you want to use your visualization, you can go into the next panel, which is preview. You click on refresh and then it will actually show you. This is the default mode, but you can change everything here. You can add labels, but everything that you're going to change here to your visualization at least won't be changed on the overview thing, whereas where you will be doing most of your research, I would imagine. One more thing and then I'll stop. If you want to see labels to your nodes or to your edges, if you've put labels on your edges, for example, saying is mother of, is father of, or works for, things like that, then you can show the node labels here. It's not very useful for this now. But for example, I immediately know that this is Asconius, son of Thebes, because 8343 is his ID number. It's a bit stupid to use these ID numbers for labels when I'm trying to explain all this to people. So I could have used his name or even his title if I was interested in that. But so that's how you do that. And here you get all the options of how to change all of this labels, however you want to. Okay, I think that was most of it. I'm sorry it was a bit quick. There's still a lot more you can do about this, but it's quite easy once you get going with this, I think. Right.
I was just about to say before you closed that, but then you closed it.
Sorry.
Is it very quick to get that visualization back up again, or will you have to run all the things again?
I can. I have another one that I'm using, which is the exact same data.
That you've already saved. I was just wondering if we could have a slightly closer look at Ismenis again and see some of the things you were talking about visualized, and you could maybe very briefly say how some of the things that you had changed in the settings and in the filters affected how it was displayed on here, just to give us a sort of visceral sense of what you've actually changed.
Right, just a second, I'm just trying to open this again. I think it's called the same thing, so it will. That's why I didn't open the right one last time. I'm thinking it has to be this one then. And otherwise, I'll quickly run it. It doesn't take long at all.
Sure.
Well, it's taking longer to open, so it might actually be the project that I'm working on.
The bigger one, yeah.
Yes. Okay. Great. Why are there no labels? Oh, right. Well, this is Ismenis, I know that.
Yeah.
There aren't any labels. So what were you going to ask me?
So just some of the things you've done. So some of the people, so the connections next to him are colored depending on what kind of connection they are?
I have colored all of these depending on the different acts that they have in property contracts. So the red nodes are all witnesses.
Right.
The orange ones are neighbors. Yellow is a combination of neighbor and something else.
Right.
And all these sort of colored ones are scribes.
Yeah. And so if you zoom in really closely on Ismenis, just so we can just see a couple of the closest people to him.
Well, these people who are spatially maybe closest to him are actually not connected to him.
Right, sure. But just so we can see the ones nearby on the thing, just so we can see what the colors have done and what the filters have done and what the sizes have done. And just I mean, it doesn't matter if they're real people, but just to sort of see. So the connections, the color of the connections, is that to do with the color of the people they're connected to, or does it color of the?
You can choose this is still on.
I mean, as you've currently got it.
Yes, but I could make it a different color depending on what sort of edges they are. But usually this is on, I think, standards, and it just gives you an extra color just coming from the nodes.
So it's the color of the node it's connecting, the nodes.
Yes, and it's actually useful when you're using a directed network, because then you can see, because it will get, the edge will get the color of the node that the direction comes from.
Right.
So, yes.
Cool. Okay, so Ismenis there is a scribe in the middle. He's connected to a bunch of contracting parties where he has been the scribe on their contracts. He's connected to a bunch of witnesses who are the witnesses on contracts that he wrote. And he also has neighbors. They're his neighbors or the neighbors of the contracting parties?
This is just people who appear in the same contracts. So they're all neighbors of properties that he's worked on.
Right. Of course, because we don't know who his neighbors are unless he was in a contract.
Yes, exactly. And he hasn't, sadly. We don't have any of that.
Yeah. So the yellow ones are all neighbors who are mentioned in it. No, the yellow ones are ones who are both neighbors and have some
something else. Usually contractual parties as well. Yeah.
Okay, and so we can see those patterns because of the way you've color coded it and scaled it. And have you filtered this at all? Is this showing everything or only the ones that are significant?
To be fair, I'm not sure anymore what I was doing with this.
No,
Maybe
sure.
filters on. Oh yes, I put a filter on that you can do here in topology of an ego network. So you can choose. So for example, I was interested in his minis. So his node ID here was 1737, and I put that in, and I chose to have all the people there that you can reach from his minis in only 2 steps. So either people who are immediately connected to him in contracts,
Right.
or are 1 step away, so are connected to any of those people. You can do it just with 1, and then you will just
that just shows you his direct.
that he just had,
Nice.
that his name is in a certain contract with these people.
With
It
those
doesn't
people,
necessarily mean that much, but well,
Yeah,
as a scribe, it does.
Well, yeah, if they were actual contractor parties or witnesses, they must have been in the room, right, at some point.
Yes, exactly.
Ideally, they unless there was some fraud going on. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So there is a sort of community sense going on there. And if you filter that, you can actually run a layout again, so it makes all a bit more sense.
So you can see,
yeah, something like that.
Right. Okay, that's nice. So that then shows you these 2 major clusters, and I guess 2 minor clusters of people, which are young.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking out loud. So.
Oh, okay. Yes, and to be fair, I'm not entirely sure anymore what all of this is, because there should be a couple more things as well.
Sure.
I'll just have a quick look at what these people are. Oh, so the purple ones are witnesses, and the red ones are contractual parties in this one. Right.
And the yellow ones are both witnesses and something else. And
yes, definitely. For example, this one here is a second party of a contract, a sudden neighbor of something. Yeah.
Right. Okay. And the orange ones are just neighbors.
Yes, they're only attested as neighbors, but sometimes multiple times. So that is.
Yeah. Nice. Cool. Thank you. Does anyone else have any comments or questions they want to pose? We've lost Greg, I'm afraid, but Anise has just left a comment in the group chat here.
Yes.
She asks for the link to the tutorial. Yeah. Is the link to the tutorial in the session in the?
Sorry, what tutorial?
To your tutorial on data ninjas.
No, I haven't put it on there yet, but I can.
We'll put it on the wiki page.
Yeah.
Yes. So she says she's interested in network visualization, has got Gephi installed, but hasn't really tried it properly before. So.
Okay. Yeah, well, those are very basic tutorials, and they should be understandable for anybody.
Yeah.
That's why we made them, so that anybody, all the historians, can just see them.
Yeah. And your data isn't available anywhere, Silke, but the sample data, which isn't particularly classical data, that comes. This is from the Gephi GitHub page, so it's designed for use with Gephi. And if you feel adventurous, there's 3 other data sets linked at the very bottom of the wiki page. I could be pointing at that, but no, that's not going to work. Anyway, at the very bottom of the wiki page, there's some other data sets which you can experiment with. Those are none of them are I don't think currently divided into nodes and edges. So you might need to do a little bit of munging to, but Table.net will help you with that, I think, to turn them into data that can be ingested into Gephi. So Stelios is also. Feel free to unmute and ask your question out loud, by the way.
Is it okay? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Now, thank you, Silke, very much. My question is the following. To my understanding, if we put together the scribe of the contract and the neighbors of the property, then we put together information that belong logically to 2 different levels. If this is correct, perhaps it isn't, But if it is correct, then what does that mean for the way we read the graph, the network?
I see what you're saying. I haven't been able to tell you exactly how I do this research, and it's quite important probably that I do mention that. What I do is I usually don't look at that one big network where all the colors are present. It's quite a nice visualization, but that's usually not what I do, except for maybe going back to it once and see whether I understand it more maybe. But what I do is I put neighbors and contractual parties together in a network, because the contractual parties have had a property with those neighbors surrounding them, and those neighbors are connected to other neighbors via other contracts. And then I try to, with a color, see whether all these people in the same neighborhoods, or at least at some point live together, also use the same scribes or the same witnesses, for example, whether there's any trend there. Then I look at witnesses and scribes. So I look at all the different relations in different networks, and I compare them then, and the metrics that go with each of these people. So I don't actually put all of those things all at once together, because it doesn't make much sense.
Okay.
Anyway, so it was much more individual, actually, the research that I do.
Okay, thank you very much.
Cool. Any other comments or suggestions? I suspect people will have questions once they've started playing with Gephi. In which case, feel free to ask those questions either on the Sunoikisis list or of either me or Silke, and we'll see what we can do. If there's no other immediate questions or comments, I guess we're good. I'll just very quickly mention that next week we'll be moving on to a slightly different type of discussion about how crowdsourcing can be used as a heritage conservation practice, using the case study of the Portable Antiquities Scheme. And that's not so much presenting a digital tool as discussing digital concepts and digital approaches. And so the exercise following on from that will be more about taking this massive crowdsourced data set and using all the methods that we've used this semester to see what we can do with that. So we'll be joined by John Pearce from King's College London next week, and we'll look forward to that. So for now, I'll say thanks again to Greg and to Silke, and speak to you all next week. Cheers.